And they that's why I remember because you have to ask every time.
Welcome. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Augusta, where we return once again, as we do each Sunday, to create a beloved community, acting with compassion, reason, and respect, empowering us together and separately to promote a just society, a society where all can thrive, a society where all have the experience of wholeness. Here in the CSRA, we reside on the lands of the Westo people, the Savannah Shawnees, and the Yuchi peoples of the Muskogee Confederacy. My name is Reverend Nick Filzen. My pronouns are he, him. And today I am so happy to be welcoming back Reverend Dan King, former UUCA minister from 1997 to 2006, to reflect with us on his memories of transformation during his time here, as we continue to transform nearly 20 years later. What a pleasure it has been to collaborate with Reverend King over the last few weeks in preparation for this service, and what a privilege it is to continue that collaboration with him, Josef Patchen, our music director, who wrote nearly all of the music for today, the talented folks running our tech deck, and all of you this morning. We are all creating this moment together, this moment of worth. And normally, in the past few weeks, we have been doing announcements just before the service, but that didn't happen this morning, which is okay. And I wanted to highlight just a few things that I think is important that you know. First, the Ed Fuqua Quartet will perform at our next Friday concert, Final Friday Jazz Concert, this coming Friday. You can visit uuaugusta.org/jazz to get tickets for that. And there are flyers all over the building, which I encourage you to take and disseminate with where you work or with your most frequented businesses. And also, I know that Richard Dillenbeck will be grumpy with me if I don't mention that there's a church workday coming up on Saturday, November 4th, and there will be a sign-up sheet for that with a list of actions that we'll take that day. So I hope that you can help with that. I will be there myself. In autumnal welcoming, Sarah Getty McNeil says, "Come in from the crisp morning air outside. Come in wearing the autumn sunlight on your face. Come carrying the turning of the seasons in your heart. Whatever and however the greatness of life is speaking to you now, and whether here in person or on Zoom, whether you've been here for decades or minutes, or whether you are returning after decades away, you are welcome here in our circle of care."
It's great to see Jack and Owen, Zilla, and so many other good faces from the past. Thank you for being here today. Our chalice lighting is from Alice Walker today. To acknowledge our ancestors means that we are aware that we did not make ourselves, that the line stretches all the way back, perhaps to God or to gods. We remember them because it's an easy thing to forget, that we are not the first to suffer, rebel, fight, love, and die. The grace with which we embrace life, in spite of the pain, in spite of the sorrow, is always a measure of what has gone before.
Would you rise in body or spirit for our opening hymn, number 361, verses 1, 3, 4, and 5.
Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Open your hearts, everyone. Open your hearts, everyone. Today will be a joyful day. Open your hearts, everyone. Don't be afraid of some change. Don't be afraid of some change. Today will be a joyful day. Don't be afraid of some change. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Palmer, and I'm part of the Pastoral Care Committee. Now is the time in our service when we share our joys and sorrows. And
There are indeed many joys, which it is a real privilege for us to be able to experience with one another in community. And of course, we all experience grief and sorrow as well, especially in the wider world. And that's what I'm going to focus on as we enter into this time for prayer and meditation. And as we do so, I invite you to get comfortable in your seats, perhaps put your feet flat on the floor, or whatever is most comfortable. If you want to cross your legs, that's perfectly fine too. Whatever works for you so that you feel most grounded. I'm going to close your eyes, clasp your hands, whatever puts you into this moment as we enter this time of prayer. Ever creative spirit of life and love, thank you. Thank you for the chance to be here with one another in community as we practice that creative quality that brings about love in the ways that we interact with each other and the ways that we move through this world. Thank you for loved ones who support us, especially when we move through a world that is so full of grief and tragedy. I pray that, at least for me and for us, that we can be exemplars of beloved community, that we can be a small model of what it looks like to hold each other with the acknowledgement of our full humanity, our full worthiness, our full dignity, which is inherent in each of us. With acknowledgement that we are in an interdependent web with each other and the ecosystems in which we exist. And I pray this in a moment that is so full of tragedy, maybe not here so much in the CSRA, but certainly in the world around us. The war in the Ukraine has been going on for a year and a half. And now we enter the third week of tragic war between Israel and Palestine. A war which, as all wars do, is impacting civilians, innocent folks, the most. Folks who are losing lives and loved ones with rampant disregard for humanity. I ask that each of us live a world that somehow amplifies to that corner of the world a sense of justice and peace, a sense of common humankind. I ask us now to hold all those who are grieving, all those with sorrows on their hearts, in our hearts, in a sense of solidarity as we enter into a moment of silence. Blessed be and amen. I realized that I neglected to invite the kids to go to faith formation classes after Joys and Sorrows, and I realized that because of the slight murmur of children during the meditation, which I kind of loved. And I hope that that was a rehumanizing moment for each of us, as it was for me. But with that, I do now invite the kids to continue their faith formation and to go visit with Miss D in the other hallway. As you go, rejoice around you. As you go, may you grow. Know our love is with you always. As you go, as you go. So much joy surrounding them. We have had many generations of this church, approaching 7, I believe, or is it just beyond 7 at this point? Around 7 generations, 7 decades, I should say, different things, all of those decades, generations, shepherded significant accomplishments and changes through as a community and as a faith tradition, both here in this small space here as a model, an exemplar, a sampling of what Unitarian Universalism is around the world. And many of those folks are still with us here today. And they did and do this work in many ways, including with their treasure. Their stewardship of the ongoing march toward beloved community inspires me to be a steward myself, which is why I put money in the plate each week, because I owe it to you. And I owe it to your ancestors, our ancestors, living and dead. I wonder if you might find yourself, the folks here today, as an ancestor down the road. I wonder if you might inspire others to sustain the mission of this church when they enter into this space. Please consider giving what you can today to shepherd us through all the accomplishments and changes to come. Will the ushers please come forward? We thank you for your generosity.
Good morning. I am so very pleased that Reverend Nick invited me to be with you today. Of course, I would have preferred to be with you in person. However, along with the usual constraints of time, space, and expense, my wife Nina and I are just recovering from 3 weeks with COVID. So it turns out that virtual appearance is a much better choice for you and for us. But to have even a virtual presence with you today, to see at least a few of our longtime friends on these screens, is a very special privilege. As a video bonus, we found a few snapshots, which we thought would help to prompt all of our memories, those of us who've been around a while, and those of us who've been gone for a while. The first slide is of a young fellow showing up to bring more hope and encouragement to your community after a period of unsettled and maybe controversy. That summer of 1997, Nina and I found a faith community which was built by folks who refused to conform to old customs about religion and race in Augusta. You collectively insisted that some things, some important things, had to change. Here's a slide of a couple of the founding family's matriarchs, the reliable teacher Peggy Kelly, and the passionate, uncompromising idealist Kate Sutherland O'Hannison. In this photo, as usual, those two were side by side. Here between Mary Selden, Alice Reese, and Kay's daughter Marjorie Land, folks who were so important to all of us. And then your church history will always include Betty and Don Hostetler, because they were stalwarts who commuted from across the river, not just on Sunday morning, for over 6 decades, beginning very soon after the church charter was signed. I see there on the screen today. We also remember others who've always been faithful supporters of the community they've loved, like Susan Bloomfield, Joyce Nolan, Gayla, Kesey, and their extended families. Other people like Sandy Hochel, who provided quiet guidance to me and to many others over the years. After our arrival here, Nina and I learned how to be in partnership with so many of you, also not just for Sunday morning programs. I will take a couple of minutes just to remind you of a few of the many changes and people whom we encountered and participated with in the 9 years we were here. During times of crisis and uncertainty, you accommodated a diversity of opinions about how our nation should respond to the tragedy of 9/11 and the expression of your principled feelings about the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. Those were hard times. But here's a photo of 3 of our our leaders, Bob Linsenmeyer, Jerry and Paula Goldman, and Terry Phillips, who also provided great examples, along with Evelyn Brown and others, promoting engagement with causes that mattered, not just to us, but to the Augusta community and to the world. Together, all of us tried to embrace the implications of the welcoming congregation program, which you adopted, the presentation of the Vagina monologues with Anita Bell, and you introduced the lifespan sexuality curriculum for our whole lives. It's Rhonda Johnson, Ruth Garrison, and Francesca Pataro. It was no surprise then that you publicly empowered support for those who felt that upholding reproductive choice is a matter of principle for Unitarian Universalists as a whole. You also figured out how to respond to roof squirrels by gathering the funds and then empowering Don Law and Stephen Heil to upgrade the education wing and restrooms, thanks to the efforts of Kay O'Hannison and Hutch. You became an even more theologically diverse community by embracing folks who weren't connected to your earlier core group from MCG or Augusta University or the Savannah River Plant. You especially welcomed diverse folks from Fort Gordon who came to stay in this community for extended periods, many of them. And then I don't want to forget Sam Boer's Sierra Club connections and Frank Carl and Jan Parsons' work with the Riverkeeper program, which reinforced this community's commitment to environmental awareness for everyone. There were some traditions that didn't need to change, at least not much over the years, like Josef Patchen and its choir, his ever-renewing music program with performers like Rob Foster. You've also been fortunate to have Sharon Shonk's reliable presence with infants and the faithful leadership of Andy and Alice Reese in promoting anti-racism efforts through Augustines Together and then the Progressive Interfaith Ministry, which has become recognized throughout Augusta as a progressive statement. But we all make mistakes of both omission and commission, myself included. But during our time together, you didn't rest. You tried out a second service, you considered options for enlarging the site or moving to a new location. But with timing, neighbors, and other factors out of your control, when they got in the way of ideas for changes, that didn't reduce your drive to continue to innovate. You had to move on. And you dealt with the complications of adjusting to different ministers who evoked mixed responses and then had to move on for various reasons. It's a fact of life that the match that is ideal, even the match with Nina and me and your congregation, would wear out. There's never a perfect match. And my wife Nina and I were also coping with changes in our lives, which led to our leaving. When we arrived, we were learning to become empty nesters. Our son had been making his way in Boston software business, and our daughter was in Texas for college and grad school the entire 9 years that we were in Augusta. Saying goodbye to them before we arrived in Augusta was practice for saying goodbye to you eventually. From here, 17 years ago, we were challenged to make another big change in our lives when we were asked to move to Boston to learn how to be grandparents and then take on other challenges for 10 years there in Massachusetts. With the benefit of time and experience, we always continue to adapt and change. We did make mistakes, but we learned enough along the way. And now it's been 4 long years since I retired from my last official role here in Space City, Houston, Earth, where I had been an assistant minister to a larger congregation and then part-time administrator. It does not seem like yesterday. There have been so many changes. The 17 years since our paths diverged have obviously been full of many significant changes for this congregation. Many of the changes, I'm sure, especially COVID restrictions, were not welcome. There were painful losses, especially for the people that you cared about who moved on in life, in death, in other places. But you had made whatever adaptation was required. So it's still possible for you, those of you who remain, to be together now, whether in person or virtually. But there's no end point to adaptation, as Charles Darwin pointed out. Today, I thought it would be important to share some personal reflections about yet another survival adaptation, a basic transformation in perspective that is in process in our Unitarian Universalist Association. This year's General Assembly theme, Faithfully Becoming, challenges and encourages us to actively participate in promoting constructive engagement with a possible transformation in how we express our Unitarian Universalist faith, a transformation in perspective which may serve to make us more engaged in living out the core values of our faith in this changing society. General Assembly always celebrates who we are and what we've done in the past year. But this June, the theme of constructive engagement with the future was explicit. Nina and I, when we're at General Assembly, always focus on the relational elements of that gathering. The people, the sermons, the seminars, much more than the delegate debates about resolutions. Because it's our chance to connect with people we don't see elsewhere, our friends from around the country. One of those good friends from our time in Augusta is Reverend Chris Bice of Knoxville, a great storyteller. This summer, Chris presented the sermon at the Service of the Living Tradition, the Rites of Passage service, which honors the transitions of our professional leaders, those who've died, those who've retired, and those beginning their careers. They gave me a chalice with a candle for 25 years of faithful service on my retirement. But my friend Chris started his sermon by sharing with us his own variation on the often quoted saying, leading church groups can be like herding cats. You know, as Chris pointed out, cats have a way of coming and going at a whim, insisting on absolute independence as long as they are fed and they are provided a comfortable place to sleep, even if it's just a box or a chair, when they choose to spend time with those of us who are lesser beings under their control. Sometimes, I have to admit, when I sit down for a service or a lecture or even a TV show, I have the same priorities. I just want a comfortable place to sit and sleep. To be honest, maybe though, we belong to our cats, not the other way around. And maybe the same is true for you churches. I know it's true. The churches belong to the members of the congregation. Nothing important can really be changed in a church like ours without moving the people toward a consensus. Chris Weiss shared his own observation that church folks can also sometimes be like turtles. They usually cross the street very slowly, and they change direction slowly. But unlike our usual quiet image of slow turtles, we know that ministers and church leaders, if they hassle our congregational turtles to move faster than they want, we may get bitten. The metaphor Chris then delivered to hearty laughter was that leading congregations through unwelcome change can be a little like trying to carry a basket of lovable snapping turtles to someplace where they really don't want to go right away. Through our consistent attendance at General Assembly, Nina and I have been observing the adaptations of our denomination over those 36 years since the first attendance I had. You might ask, what does that adaptation look like so far? Well, the nature of many gatherings has changed drastically with the advent of COVID restrictions. Virtual attendance is becoming more the norm than the exception. This, along with the transition from a male-dominated ministry to a female-dominated ministry, the acceptance of gay rights, the acceptance of transgender rights, the understanding that we are serving a wider community rather than focusing on our natural audience of hyper-educated, hyper-successful, progressive, and liberal folks. We are always at the vanguard. Well, the virtual attendance, the Zoom part, is much more economical and practical. But for me, it's a loss I don't want to accept, even when, like this morning, it's necessary and convenient. And that's not a critique of those dozen or maybe a couple of dozen of you who are watching from wherever you are this minute, or whenever you happen to be watching in the future. Because now, not only does Don Hostetler record on audio tape, there's something in the cloud that can be redeemed and refreshed for as long as we can imagine in future viewings. And those of us who have already adapted, those wise folks who have avoided spending the time, energy, and resource to travel to church service today, you are at the vanguard, the margins of technical acceptance. Today, although I would prefer to be in Augusta, I also have good reason for my decision to accept this benefit of adapting to virtual attendance and avoid the costs, which would have been terrible for someone who's ill. Darwin made the point that survival of species depends on the ability to adapt to changes in environment. and the prospects of our children and our grandchildren and our churches will depend on those adaptations. So what is the organizational change for the UUA now under discussion? It's a modest proposal to reframe our bylaws, to change some words in a document which few of us have ever read. Since 1983, our hymnal has shown us these are the words. We've ritually promised that our congregations will affirm and promote our association's 6 sources and now 7 principles. But over the last 3 years, there's been discussion of a new 8th covenant to active engagement with anti-racism and anti-oppression. But along with this, on a separate track, our leaders have set up a special commission 3 years ago to reconsider how our whole covenantal relationship might be more effectively restated. They felt that the covenants told us what our congregation's shared values are, but not why and how we, the people in our congregations, will affirm and promote those principles. So the proposed bylaw amendments to Article 2 of the Unitarian Universalist Association bylaws, how those would retain the essence of our current covenants in a different framework if the delegates to the virtual General Assembly next summer, if those delegates vote to approve the final version, which is still under discussion. I'll just give you that framework without restating the details. It begins, the purpose of the association is to actively engage members in the transformation of the world through the power of liberating love. We, covenant, congregation to congregation, and through our association to support and assist one another in our ministries. It calls for collaboration among the congregations. But then here's the why. Love is the power that holds us together and is at the center of our shared values. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values in the spiritual discipline of love. End quote. We are all being asked over the next 7 or 8 months to consider how this reframing of our purposes may serve as the latest adaptation, not changing what we are, who we are, but more effectively communicating our mission and our promises to each other. I have great confidence that your minister and leadership will find ways to help you, if you want, to be constructively engaged in discussing how this new frame might help us to demonstrate how we are faithfully becoming, motivated by love. Unitarians and Universalists like us have been involved in radical reformation of religious consciousness for centuries. And so why, you may ask, do we need to be constantly on the uncomfortable cutting edge of our society? Why should we spend the energy it takes to discuss and debate and perhaps adapt to changes in anything, but especially in our statement of purpose and mission? I think it's because we must avoid becoming the frozen people, which would make us irrelevant to society and to ourselves. Here's a final slide I would like you to consider. Some changes that take years of discussion can be achieved by folks who persist and gently continue to guide folks toward an important goal, like Hoyt and Liz Goodson and the sign, which was the product of at least 4 years of discussion. What sign would be there? What would it look like? Where would it be located? And how were you going to pay for it? And I was so rewarded that happened before Nina and I left Augusta. So it's not just ancient history about heroes named in books. I know so many of you in churches like Augusta, which I've served, people who have long gone, and some who still show up sometimes, maybe virtually, maybe in person, once in a while, who are showing all of the turtles the way toward healthy, never-ending adaptation, faithfully becoming, crossing the road, even though it's dangerous. You are my heroes, then and now. I appreciate you, and I thank you for this opportunity to spend a few moments and share my thoughts. I am blessed, and I know you are too. Amen. Shalom. Blessed be.
Would you rise in body or spirit for our closing hymn, number 114, Forward Through the Ages, verses 1 and 3.
Not only the Buddhist tradition tells us that when the Buddha was leaving his disciples, he told them that everything they needed to pursue enlightenment was within themselves. But stasis is not healthy. In his sermon, my friend Chris Bice recognized that change may be deferred or delayed, but some adaptations are really inevitable. To fully live out our values and our principles, we are called continually to implement elements of transformation or metamorphosis, to make the necessary adaptations for survival. In this community, you've achieved much. You have had many successes and made some mistakes. But through almost 70 years, I am grateful that you are still faithfully becoming. But discerning whether and how to resist unhealthy change and when and how to accept healthy change is a question of exercising informed judgment. That always requires all of us to be open, to listen to each other, and especially to those with the wisdom that we have good reason to trust. I charge you now to go forth from this time with my continuing blessing, with confidence, with courage, with hope, with compassion, and with love. Let's go, turtles. Do what's needed to be done. Blessed be.
All the stirrings